Another topic that is important is
Yes.
documentation. So again, going back to the IKEA furniture, and
Yeah.
I know people hate it, but honestly, if you think about IKEA furniture documentation or like the instructions, it's fascinating. It's fascinating because you have to pay attention to the details because they tell you exactly, very precisely how you're supposed to do things. And if you overlook the tiniest element, the tiniest drawing, you're gonna mess it up. So as I was also assembling furniture, I thought this is quite amazing actually, that they did this without words, and they explain very extensively the how you do it. The difference with documenting a pipeline is that you should not be documenting the how. The how should be in the code. The code should be
Yeah.
self-explanatory, but you should be documenting the why. You should explain why you're doing this here, especially if you've made a decision that doesn't seem very clear. Why did you comment out the not no test? Like, well, what's happening there? Just add a comment, say why.
Yes.
Um, on the other end, of course, you have DBT talks, for instance. So you have, or catalogs. You have many ways now to increase the discoverability of your data and explain what is what. So that's another
Yeah.
uh, part of the work, I would say, because that's more about how you're going to be able to let your stakeholders adopt your data product. Um, but when it comes to the code itself, the transformation pipeline itself, documenting the why is very important.
Yes. I sometimes see in code like a filter clause on like product is equal to 3000 sorry, product ID is equal to 3000 something. I really expect them to tell me, oh yeah, this product ID is actually this, and the reason we're filtering it out or keeping it in for is because of this, this, and this. But if you're analyzing this other thing, please erase this.
Yeah,
Something like that
absolutely.
makes a massive difference.
I agree. I've seen so many times a case when statement or a where clause where it says in the comment exactly filtering this out. And you think, yeah, I know that's exactly what the code does. That's exactly what the where clause says.
Yes.
But why? Why are we filtering it out? Because especially with a filter, you might think that that reduces the reusability of your query, right? Because now you filtered out some of it and you want to do that as late as possible. So why are you doing it here? And sometimes it's going to be very clear. You're going to be, let's say, where valid to is null, and then you think, okay, they are filtering out anything that has a valid date. Sorry, that has expired. So the valid to has an expiration date. But there are many cases, especially when you have a
Yeah.
code, product ID or something like that, you wouldn't know. And I think ideally it would even refer you to maybe the document, whether it's a PowerPoint or a SharePoint document or whatever, that says exactly what is what.
Yes. So you touched already two topics there. The first one is going back to layering. I fully believe that maybe 99 to 95% of all of the renamings should happen exactly in the same stage in the same file. Same for anything that you would consider data cleaning. Same for everything that you would consider as loading or unioning or joining and so on.
Hmm.
So yeah, just even though it's hard, keeping everything consistent to the same layer makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
But then going to the topic of documentation that you mentioned, we already talked like yes, the whole every time when I see a Python script that has a comment that says loading data, I know that's a very beginner mistake. You really should focus on the why. Maybe what are some other tips that you would have for people that want to work on documentation?
That's a good question
Well,
because because the thing with documentation is do it as early as possible when you decide, okay, let's do it, or when you start developing new pipelines, or maybe you have a new platform, do it as early as possible because it's very difficult to do after the fact. You don't remember what you did exactly. You have to look back at what's what, and it's painful. It's cumbersome. I don't like when I have to spend days documenting, so I try to do it as I go. But yeah, that's maybe like a very
no.
basic tip, but in my opinion, a useful one.
You know, some developers say like you should write the documentation and the test before you start writing any other line of code. I honestly have never met any person that does this well. But yeah, I agree. Doing it a bit earlier tends to pay off.
In a way, I would agree with this, and I think
Yeah.
maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you're not writing it down in your code already, but ideally, for instance, the definitions of your data fields, they should come from the business because they are the data owners. They are the ones who are asking for this particular field. So since they give this to you upfront, and maybe they even indicate what data type that should be, and maybe what constraints should be applied, whether that should be a unique primary key, that should be there should not be any nulls. Maybe the accepted values are like there's a list provided by
Yeah.
them. Um, then you already have that kind of documentation before you even start writing the code. Of course, whether you should already add the comments in the code before you even write it, I think that's a bit extreme. But yeah, maybe that helps as well to kind
Yeah.
of break down your work and avoid redoing it over and over again.
Yeah, honestly, one thing that I've seen in some companies that I think works extremely well is asking whoever is requesting the data to write the documentation.
Yeah.
And of course, to make that work, you really need some templates and you really need that the person requesting has to be a bit technical. But indeed, people already share a lot of those details. For example, when you calculate this, make sure to exclude this value, or make sure that you use the data coming from here and so on.
Yeah. Have you? So I think indeed it might be a little bit of a burden, you could say, on whoever requested the data in the first place. But going back to IKEA, it seems like this is my passion now.
Yes.
There's something called the IKEA effect.
Oh, okay.
Um, so in 2011, they did a study and they saw that subjects that assembled the furniture themselves were willing to pay 63% more for the same furniture. So we value things where we have input into more than things that are just given to us. And I definitely
Mm,
recognize that in the data world as well, because I was a data analyst. I was providing a lot of data to people, and I don't think it was always appreciated at its actual value for the effort that was demanded. I think if they had had some input in it and yeah, taken part in it more actively, they would have valued it a bit more because then suddenly it's something that they contributed to that now comes to life. And especially if they are contributing to the later stages of the transformation, uh, even more
yeah.
so if, let's say, they have an analytics engineer that builds the transformations and then they pick it up and build a dashboard on top, then it has a complete different type of value to them. And I think it's the same with documentation.
No, for sure. I've seen companies that they're very strict. Like you have to write a ticket, you need to do this, and they create a lot of process just because they know that the people that actually follow the process and that bother, they probably really need it.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a perfect system because you can always say like, I'm not gonna follow this. I'm gonna create my own shadow IT, and that's how you create like platforms on top of platforms. But there is some truth in making people not work, but put some of the effort if they want something in return from the data team.
Yeah. Yeah, and own it, right?
Yes.
Own it fully. Um, that's also something that any data professional has faced is sometimes you're being asked to deliver something, but the something that you're being asked is not very clear. And
Always.
if you have a very good product owner, they will think about this. Of course, they will refine and help you like figure out exactly what is needed. But it's not always the case. We don't always have teams that are big enough or the resources to have a product owner to help. And getting to that, getting to the business or whoever is requesting this data to be very specific about what they need is very difficult. And that is also understandable, of course, because sometimes it's very difficult for someone who doesn't have experience with this particular data for that particular company. Maybe
Yeah.
they just joined and the company never had that data available to them. So for them to express a very clear need is difficult because they haven't explored it even. But then maybe that is what they need right now. Maybe what they need right now is some sort of self-service or way to explore the data rather than a very um, constrained dashboard or report.
No, I fully agree. Sometimes, but it's a tricky proposition because when people know very clearly what they want, how to get it, where to get it, generally it's much more efficient for them to get it. So if you work as a data person and you handle any type of ad hoc request, just know the people that have very clear requests, chances are they're familiar with data and they're getting them themselves.
Yeah.
We are like, I guess, cursed to always work with requests that are not very clear.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what makes it interesting, right? Personally, I love thinking about, okay, what is the
Structuring.
actual problem here behind? Talking to someone and trying to figure out what they actually need. Um, if you're getting very clear but frequent ad hoc requests, I think that's also a red flag. That this could be made available somewhere different than you literally just translating a sentence into a SQL query. In that case, there are tools that may help you with that, especially nowadays with LLMs. But it could also be as simple as a dashboard that just gives that information, especially if it's coming frequently.
Yeah, a dashboard with some filter sometimes does the job.
Absolutely.